Erev Shabbat Shalom Ravotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Sheviit. We are up to Perek Tet Mishnah Chet. Today's Mishnah should be Leilu Nishma Neria ben Tzvilana Aranbai Menuchato Began Eden Amen, and Abdil ben Chaim Lechaim for the Refuah Shelema of Yonatan ben Avraham Betoch Shar Cholei Yisrael. Today's Mishnah is going to teach us what a person does with Shemitah produce when the biur deadline arrives. The Mishnah says, Mishayu lo perot Sheviit ve'higia shat biur. If a person has produce of Shemitah in his house when the time for biur arrives, mechalek mazon shalosh seudot lekol echad ve'echad. He may distribute 3 meals worth of food to each member of his household and then to each of his friends and relatives. Meaning, the Mefarshim explained to us that when the biur deadline arrives, a person is allowed to leave for himself and other people of his choosing enough food for 3 meals, which suffices for 1 day. This food does not require biur. This, the Mefarshim explain, is only allowed until sunset on the day of the deadline. After sunset, he may not distribute any remaining food to particular people, but he has to leave it out for everyone to take, like we're going to explain right now. He then leaves what remains at the entrance of his house. He gives up the right to the ownership of it, and he says, the Rab explains that he says, Achenu bet Yisrael misha tzarich litol, my brothers, the house of Israel, whoever has to take, whoever has a need to take, let him take. Now the Mishnah is going to bring down a machloket Tanaim, a disagreement amongst the Tanaim, who is allowed to take the produce. V'aniim ochlin achar biur avalo ashirim divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says poor people may take the produce and eat it after the biur has been performed, but not rich people. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, and the Mefarshim explain, according to Rabbi Yehuda, although anyone, both rich and poor, can take Shemitah produce before the biur deadline, Rabbi Yehuda says that once the biur has been performed, only the poor are entitled to the produce. Rabbi Yossi Omer, however, Rabbi Yossi says, Echad aniyim ve'echad ashrim ochlin achar biur. Both poor and rich people may take and eat it after the biur. And Mefarshim explain, according to Rabbi Yossi, even rich people can take the produce after the biur. Now the Mefarshim do point out that whenever the Mishnah says that Shemitah produce is prohibited after biur, the case is talking about where the owner failed to do the mitzvah biur at the proper time, at the required time. The produce would then become asur to everyone forever. However, if the biur was performed properly, the produce would be mutar according to Rabbi Yehuda for only the poor, or according to Rabbi Yossi for everybody. Anytime we say that the produce is asur after the biur deadline, that's when you didn't perform biur properly. And the Rab does tell us, v'alakha Rabbi Yossi, the halakha does follow Rabbi Yossi, that both poor and rich people can take it and eat it after the biur deadline. And just to point out, the Ars Elucidator brings down, in the name of the Ramban, in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 25, pasuk 7, that the words poor and rich are not meant literally here as poor and rich. Rather, rich refers to someone, even if he's a poor person, who picked produce from his own field during Shemitah, while poor refers to someone, even if he's technically a rich person, to someone who picked produce from the fields of others. Rabbi Yehuda says that after one has performed biur with his produce of his own land, he may not take it back for himself. Only other people, meaning the poor, can acquire it. Rabbi Yossi, on the other hand, says that once the owner left the produce outside and made it ownerless as required by the laws of biur, he is allowed to take it back. That is the Rabotai of Mishnah Chet. Mishnah Tet now is going to bring us another machloket regarding the laws of Shemitah produce. If someone has Shemitah produce that fell to him as an inheritance or was given to him as a gift, and the Mefarshim explain, a person picked Shemitah produce in a permitted manner and then died and someone else inherited it, or he gave it to somebody as a gift. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Eliezer says, it should be given to others who will eat it together with him, meaning he may not eat the produce by himself because he then would be likely to express gratitude to his benefactor, which is asur. The Mefarshim point out that we learned earlier in chapter 4, Mishnah 2, Bet Shammai says that one who picks Shemitah produce is forbidden to thank the owner of the field, because that would imply that the produce has an owner who has the right to withhold it from people, which would contradict the Torah's mitzvah to let the public take Shemitah produce. Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah is following the view of Bet Shammai. Therefore, he says, if someone received Shemitah produce as a gift or an inheritance, he may not eat the produce on his own, because then he would be likely to show gratitude to the person who gave it to him. Instead, he has to share the produce with others. The Mefarshim do point out that this ruling is a little bit difficult to understand, because since the benefactor picked the produce in a permitted manner, it became his private property in which he actually has the full rights of ownership. Therefore, showing him gratitude would technically be completely allowed, just like showing gratitude to any person when one receives private property. That's a side note. Again, look back in Mishnah chapter 4, Mishnah 2, where we discussed more at length about if you're allowed to show gratitude to someone who gave you Shemitah produce. That was a dispute between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. Bet Hillel did tell us we may eat Shemitah produce whether with a show of gratitude or without a show of gratitude. The reason Rabbi Eliezer is saying it's a surir, he's following the opinion of Bet Shammai. But the sages say, the Mishnah continues, the sinner, meaning the recipient who sins, if he expresses gratitude, should not receive any benefit from the produce for free. Rather, it should be sold to him, meaning he must pay for the produce so that he will not feel any gratitude. And the money should be distributed to all people. The Mefarshim point out, the Chachamim agree, even if the recipient of the gift or inheritance shares the produce with others, he will still be thankful to the benefactor for it. Therefore, he must pay for the produce so that he will not owe anyone any thanks. Once he paid for it, he may enjoy the produce even without sharing it with others, as the Rav tells us. Now, the Mefarshim do point out, according to the Chachamim, there's nothing wrong with expressing gratitude for Shemitah produce. Again, that's the view of Bet Hillel, like we just said, it's allowed. According to Rabbi Eliezer, who follows the view of Bet Shammai, and in that case, he forbids expressing gratitude for Shemitah produce. Again, the Chachamim follow the opinion of Bet Hillel, who permitted. Therefore, the Chachamim would rule that if somebody receives Shemitah produce as a gift or inheritance, he can eat it entirely by himself, and he doesn't have to pay for it. In this Mishnah, they're referring to Rabbi Eliezer's ruling in his own terms, like what we call in the Gemara, ultamech, according to your own reasoning. Meaning, if it's true that expressing gratitude is forbidden, like you, Rabbi Eliezer, say in the opinion of Bet Shammai, the problem cannot be solved by sharing the produce with other people, because he still might be grateful. Rather, what he has to do is he has to pay for the produce, so that now it's his own, and then the money would be distributed to all people. Now, Rabotai, the Mishnah moves on to discuss when making dough, a person we know is obligated, we'll learn about it more at length later on in the next Masechtot, a person's obligated to remove a portion and give it to the Kohen. This portion is called challah. The Mishnah teaches that the obligation of challah applies even to Shemitah produce. The Mishnah says, Ha'ochel me'isat Sheviit ad shelo hurma chalatah chayav mitah. If someone ate from dough of Shemitah produce before its challah was separated, he is liable to death at the hands of heaven, just as he would be were he to eat dough of non-Shemitah produce before its challah was separated. The Mefarshim explain produce from which the required portions of terumah, maasot, and challah were not removed at all. That's called tevel. The punishment for eating tevel is death at the hands of heaven. We'll discuss this more in Masechet Challah, chapter 1, Mishnah 9. Why is the Mishnah telling us this law? A person could have thought that Shemitah produce is not subject to obligation of challah, because challah that became tameh must be destroyed, which cannot be done with Shemitah produce, since destroying produce of Shemitah is asur. Therefore, the Mishnah is telling us that in fact the obligation of challah does apply to the Shemitah produce, and the Rav tells us that this we learn from Psukim in the Torah. The pasuk tells us in the Torah, Dichtiv, Dirishit arisotechem, the first of the dough. The Chazal say, Me'ezu isa shetiyeh challah tarimu. Doesn't make a difference where the dough is from. You have to remove challah from it. That is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody, Shara Be'erev Shabbat Shalom. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.